Live. Hello, welcome to 30 Questions. Welcome to 30 Questions on my YouTube channel, the least consistent YouTube channel in the history of the internet. We are live here with Krish Ashok, and I'm very excited about today's episode because this is a subject that I just naturally am a huge fan of because it is food, and I love food. I love to eat. So basically, I have loved one side of the food chain, let's call it that. And in the lockdown, like many other people, I had to fend for myself, and I learned to cook, and I suddenly discovered this whole new beautiful and brilliant world. And as I started cooking a little more, I decided to read a little more. And one of the books I came across was this awesome book called Masala Lab, not by Masala Lab, called Masala Lab by Masala Lab, because that's also what you call your Instagram account. So
Instagram handle, yeah.
right,
yes.
there we go. And it is by Krish Ashok, who is here on our show with us. Hi, welcome to the show.
Absolute pleasure.
For those of you who don't know, aside from being the writer of this book, he is he's a home cook. He is a techie. He is a musician. He is also in the eternal and perennial shit show that is Twitter, one of the nice and great people to follow, and is like a shining star among so much muck. Because and I have to tell you this, Ashok, it's a Twitter thread that for me is like the gold standard of what a Twitter thread can be. Was you did one once where you explained GPS.
Yes.
And that is still to date, I think, one of my favorite explanations of anything at all. Tara Priya Das. So I'm also going to be reading the chat. A couple of people in the chat, like Tara saying, I thought we were going to be cooking here. I'm not quite ready to display my cooking skills on camera yet. Photos of the finished product, yes. But cooking skills on camera, no. Good evening, Aditya. Good evening, everybody. Yes, Ganeshka, this will be available to watch later on the channel as well. Hi, Super Team. Hi, everyone. So first question, tell us for those who might not know, what is Masala Lab?
So Masala Lab, The Science of Indian Cooking, is a book that I wrote at about the start of the pandemic. I then finished it in about 3 months, and then Penguin released it in December of 2020. It was originally born as a sort of a nerd's guide to cooking.
Okay.
But then with the careful and nice editing of the good folks at Penguin, they said, no, don't cater to nerds. Let's write a book that caters to everyone. And let's try and explain science, not using equations, but using simpler first principles. And more importantly, the idea was to try not to sort of, bro mansplain cooking to women, but to actually say, look, a lot of the tacit wisdom that our grandmothers had, and they kind of intuitively know how to cook food. And I think, as Harold Mackey says, in the kitchen, it's the knowledge of cooking that matters, not food science.
Sure.
It's entirely optional, right? And so the idea is to say, can I use science to explain what they do so that the next generation can have a better frame with which to learn that? Not everyone gets to learn from their grandmothers and mothers anymore.
Sure.
So I think, so that was the entire idea. So it's essentially from the basics to covering everything from acids to spices to newer things, to use of alcohol, to use of your fancy things.
I just like to specify too. This is unfortunately some of this might be my audience, Ashok. So when he says acids, he does mean acidic substances in food specifically, and no other kinds of it.
Sour things, essentially. Anything that's sour.
Sour things. Yes, sour things is a good phrase to use. Okay, here we're gonna jump in. So the way it works with 30 questions is, chat, you get to ask questions as well, and I have a bunch of questions, but I'm gonna start it with this chat one that has caught my eye from Ravi Jadhav, which is, and I have no doubt will have a scientific answer for this: why tasty food is always unhealthy?
Yes. So unfortunately, the answer for that answer to go back sort of like a couple of billion years ago. Okay. So the thing is that for the most part, most living things on the planet live in a very resource constrained environment, in that it's really, really goddamn hard to produce glucose or to find glucose and essentially the energy currency is glucose. No matter what you eat, ultimately it's all glucose. Okay. So even your fat that gets stored, it has to be converted to glucose for you to use it. So the whole idea is that unhealthy food essentially is defined as things that are high calorie and easy to digest, meaning that you don't have to do too much work. And that historically mankind has never had till the 20th century. So it's just that
you have to scrounge for every piece of glucose.
Right. And so the stuff that you got, the vegetables were fibrous, the wilder plants were harder to digest. You had to largely eat sort of direct meat, either cooked over a fire and so on. You really didn't have things like chicken McNuggets or maida and those kinds of processed bleached flours or direct white sugar, which is a very, very new thing.
Yep.
And so it's those high calories. So our brains are wired to say, if you get calories, please eat it because you won't know when you're going to get it next. Okay. And so our brains are wired, with evolutionary sort of, a billion years ago, sort of man's brain of saying, if I find something sweet, I better eat it and I better enjoy it because I don't know when I'm going to get my next meal. The problem is we get that kind of meal 3 times a day now. And so we're not designed for it. So, and our brains are wired to find it absolutely addictive.
As I sip from this not at all sugary cola, thank you, Tara, for the super chat. Hetvi has a question, which might be like vaguely tied into this. I don't know. I don't know much about science, unfortunately. Wish I did. Why do we feel sleepy after eating?
Yeah. So what happens is that our body is regulated by a bunch of these hormones that are released by different parts of the body. One is to trigger sleep. One is to trigger you to wake up. One is to essentially the immune system triggers you to stay put while it's repairing your body, which is why you get a fever and all those other kinds of things and so on. So there's various kinds of these states, right? And then when you're in pleasure, so there's like dopamine and endorphin is released. Sometimes when you have sex or when you even run a long distance or when you eat a chili for that matter, any kind of pain also releases endorphins and so on. So what happens is that I think digesting food takes up a fair bit of the calories that we actually eat, right? So part of the reason why exercise doesn't help you lose weight is because the fraction of calories you lose as a result of exercise is a tiny fraction of the number of calories you actually need to just digest food. Okay. Sure. So literally the only thing that helps you is actually eat less food. And what ends up happening is that because that's a very complicated process, and again, depending on how tough the food is that it is to digest, typically very fibrous food, a high protein food, and so on, your brain will say that, look, I need to spend a lot of energy to digest, so I'm not going to give too much to the brain. So it's kind of better that you kind of doze off, right? I don't want your brain too much active, so you'll automatically feel sleepy when you do that.
This is exactly, I'm going to cut this 60-second chunk, and this is going to be my exact explanation to why, to my team and to my colleagues as to why I need that Monday afternoon nap.
Naps are actually excellent. So some cultures like Spain, they have an institutionalized siesta in the afternoon.
Yes, they do.
It's not a bad idea at all.
Yes, they do. It's true. Okay, one more food question. This time, a little quick one from Mahike Andy. If you could only have one taste, which one would that be?
Tough call. I would probably have to go with salt, because for the most part, actually, most of your experience of flavor is smell. It's not taste.
Okay? Right. True. Yes. So
you can happily do without most of the tastes. But unfortunately, what happens is when you have a cold or COVID or something like that, you lose your sense of smell. No, you don't lose your sense of taste. So tastes are only 5 things: sweet, salt, sour, bitter, and umami. That's it, right? And for the most part, I think salt is very, very is the thing that amplifies taste the most. Mm-hmm. Sweet is pretty good, and the other things
but
are
just pure sweet. Like anybody who's ever eaten too much dessert knows that pure sweet gets cloying and starts to hurt.
Exactly.
Quick.
So that's why good desserts are also a little bit sour.
Exactly.
Like lemon tart works because it's also sour. It's acidic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the whole idea. And I think, and actually, by the way, good brownies are also salty. So that's why sea salt and caramel brownies really works.
It is. Can I say with some pride that is the one thing I've been experimenting with in the kitchen obsessively over the last 4 weeks, is trying to nail the perfect cookies. And I got some sea salt and I ground it up in a coffee grinder / dry spice grinder, which I bought on advice from a book called Masala Lab. And it changed my world because you actually advise people to, instead of buying powdered spices, buy a dry spice grinder and then use that.
Buy whole spices,
Buy whole spice, which I will use to segue into my next question. You can find out more about this in Masala Lab, but to give them a preview of why don't you tell us? That's my next question. Why not buy all those amazing spice powders that you see on all these shelves around you?
So let me be clear, right? So if you're too lazy, if you want to spend the least amount of time cooking, there is no harm in buying spice powders. But then the problem is that India, room temperature is not exactly very spice friendly, meaning
Sure.
that anything you put at room temperature is getting oxidized. Okay. And the thing is that, see, the plant protects all those precious spice oils inside all of that hard casing, right? The moment you powder it, it's exposed to the elements, it's exposed to oxygen, it's going to get oxidized, and then it just tastes like sand, right? Garam masala, 2 weeks is just sand. Okay. And so if you buy spice powders, and if you're storing it in the freezer, as you should, then you're okay. They can
But
last
how many
quite a long
people have
while.
that much space in their freezer with everything else?
Exactly, right. And that's also another desi thing, right? Indian fridges tend to have smaller freezers because the Indian customer does not buy fridges with large freezers, because India has this whole everything has to be fresh.
Yep.
Stupid culture. Again, to sort of going back to patriarchy, that no, everything has to be cooked fresh, nothing from the freezer, nothing from fridge, right? So all our fridges also have like smaller freezers. Nowadays there are some, but if you're buying a fridge, get one with a large freezer. Trust me, you'll store more things in it, and
It's
you
the
will never
thing
waste
I've
things.
learned the hard way. I have a fridge with a small freezer, and I've had it, and it's horrible. It's like waiting for a rich relative to die. I'm just like, look at somebody, and I'm just waiting for you to die. So one day I'm gonna get another fridge that's going to have a freezer twice this size, and I don't need Akriti, thank you so much for your super chat. Akriti has a question, which is, and again, this is something that does get addressed in the book, but it'll be fun to answer. Do the utensils in which the food is cooked matter? And you have a chapter about reactive and non-reactive metals and just dishes in general. So please tell us more about that.
So
I love this part, guys. Listen up.
Right. So not as much as people think it does. Okay. Your vessel reacts with your food in the limited context of things like iron, aluminum, and copper, reacting with any acidic food. Basically, tomatoes, tamarind, kokum, yogurt. Anything that's acidic is going to leach the metal. And it's okay for iron because iron is not bad for your body, but not good for copper and aluminum, which are not healthy for you. Okay. On the long run, again, in tiny amounts, you're okay. But the whole idea is that stainless steel in general is non-reactive, right? So in general, the most, if you short on money and you just want to buy one material, just buy good stainless steel, heavy gauge, right? So that food doesn't stick, because stainless steel is notorious for food sticking to it.
Right.
And for making eggs, just have one good quality non-stick, and that's really about it. Otherwise, all these other things about using clay pots and terracotta and infusing flavor to the food, all that is very, very pseudoscientific. So it doesn't really matter.
That brings us actually to my next question, which is extremely important because this debate is tearing hipster cooking apart. I need your opinion on this cast iron craze. Where are you on cast iron? Because it costs like 2 arms, 2 legs, and a kidney. And there seem to be cooking hipsters that are in love with it. And also, yes, traditionally it's been used a lot, but how much of a difference does cast iron make?
See, I think, so because stainless steel is a very modern invention, it was always expected that any metallic thing will rust or will be copper oxidizes, aluminum oxidizes, all of these things oxidize, right? So cast iron, the reason it has always been around for a long time is, one, because it's a fantastic retainer of heat, because it's goddamn heavy, and it really retains heat very well. And the other thing is that because we cook with a lot of oil, right? As the oil gets heated on the surface of the cast iron, it polymerizes and almost forms a non-stick layer.
Okay.
That's what we call the seasoning, right? So the longer you cook on a cast iron, the more non-stick it keeps becoming. Right. And so in the hands of a reasonably seasoned cook or a chef, they'll make sure that they don't use like iron foil or tin foil or steel foil to sort of clean it, and they'll keep that seasoning on so that it stays non-stick, and you can cook acidic foods in it without the iron leaching into it if you maintain it properly, right? And so in a sense that if you're someone who's willing to put that effort, paying close attention, not making sure that you wash it, you immediately dry it by heating it, and don't leave it with water because it will rust and so on. Yes, go ahead. In that way, it's a universal thing. You don't have to buy a non-stick and worry about whether the Teflon is good for you or not. You don't have to worry about the stickiness of stainless steel, because here food will not stick and so on. Yes, if you're willing to put that effort, I think cast iron is fantastic. But if you're not, and also remember that cast iron is goddamn heavy. Okay.
Right.
So you need pretty good
cast iron is very, very heavy.
Yes. So yeah. So if you're up to it, you do that. Otherwise, just buy stainless steel and one non-stick.
You go again, Tara. Thank you for your super chat. Much. I think more questions. Hey, here's one that comes up Pooja says cast iron maintenance is too much. I'm with you on that. Suneet, yes, this video will be available to be watched later on. This is something that is going to, you have no idea. I've already thought, Suneet, of the number of different segments I'm going to cut out of this video. Believe me, like, I don't have to stream for another month. This is great. Ashok, can you be on my channel every month, please?
Oh, sure, why not? We can do one sort of, a public Q&A, cooking Q&A.
Yeah, I think that would be
and we
great.
can take like controversial topics and,
I think that's a great idea. We should totally do that.
Should do one on biryani. Yes.
Okay, here we go. More questions. I'm going to... the Daily Chai Latte wants to know, is it okay to use olive oil for Indian cooking in the US? Not for deep frying, but for general Indian veggies.
Absolutely. So you have to remember one thing. There are different kinds of olive oil, extra virgin, virgin, then non-virgin, just processed olive oil and so on. If you're heating the oil to any reasonable temperature, even to do tadka, please don't use extra virgin olive oil. Okay. The whole idea of any kind of extra virgin cold pressed oil of any kind, like sesame, groundnut, doesn't matter, right? Is that it's just pressed once and it's not processed, it's not refined. So there's lots of other aromas and chemicals from that plant or that seed that are there in the oil, right? Which lend it its flavor and smell. But they dissipate if you heat the oil too much. Okay, right. So which is why extra virgin olive oil great for salads and dressings and so on, but not for cooking. So drizzle it on top, perfectly fine, right? And so generally the reason we use refined oil is that once you heat oil to above 100 Celsius, all of those fancy aromas are gone. So there's no point wasting expensive.
It's just oil
on that at all. Yeah, it's just oil. Yeah.
All right. Well, there we go. That's your here's one. Darshan Parekh has a question. What is umami? That's actually a great question. What is umami? Because that is a question that a lot of people...
Yeah. So essentially, if you understand, as I said, 80% of flavors actually knows, but what we taste is 5 things, okay? And the reason we have these 5 tastes is because each of those things plays a very specific biological role, because your body needs it, and that's why we have a taste for it.
Right.
Or the body wants to prevent you from eating it, so we have a taste. So that's bitter. So we'll explain that. So we have a taste bud for salt, because your body needs a certain amount of sodium, without which your heart will not function.
Sure.
But not too much sodium, at which point your heart will stop. So that's why we have tolerance for a range of salt, but not too much. Too salty food you can't eat.
Yeah, fair.
But below a certain threshold, it's bland. Okay, so you're basically, your body's telling you this is the right amount of salt that you need to eat, right? So that's the detection of sodium on your tongue, right? Is salt. So incidentally, anything that has sodium will taste salty. That includes MSG, that includes baking soda, that includes anything that has sodium will taste salty. So that's number one. Second thing is sour. Sour is the detection of acids, detection of protons, basically. Okay. Right. So anything that is acidic, you will feel it in your tongue, on the sides of your tongue. It also encourages salivation, and sourness also balances other tastes, right? So it mutes sweetness, and it also balances out bitter and many other things. So sourness is there, right? It makes food interesting in general. Okay. Right. The third thing is actually bitter. Bitter is at the back of your tongue largely because you don't want to eat any poisons, and poisons tend to be bitter. Right. So alkaloids, a category of chemicals, are bitter, so you want to detect that and so on. But some foods that are bitter are also good for you, so you'll have to, it's an acquired taste. You have to get used to bitter foods.
I love that phrase, acquired taste. It used to hand wave away so many food dislikes. It's exactly, like, it's an acquired taste, I guess.
Yeah.
But yes.
And sweetness is simply the detection of glucose, fructose, and any simple sugar, right? And your brain is wired to instantly want to like, and in fact,
so it's not the hardwired. That's not the depression I'm hardwired with. That's not what. Yes. That's not what the craving for sweet is. Okay, got it.
Right. And by the way, a little bit of sweet will amplify everything else, right? Because it's your brain is being signaled that whatever you're eating is high calorie. So make sure that he enjoys it, no matter how shitty it is. He's going to enjoy it, right? So your brain,
I'm feeling personally attacked. I'm feeling informed and personally attacked right now. I hate this. Yeah. But yeah, okay.
So we've always thought these were the only 4 tastes for donkey's years, right? And then the Japanese discovered that in the early part of the 20th century, that there's a 5th kind of taste bud that detects one kind of amino acid called glutamate. So glutamic acid is one of the amino acids that makes up proteins. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, we still don't quite exactly know why we have it. Why, like we know the rest of the taste buds, we know their function and why we have it. Umami is still a mystery. The current accepted theory.
It's delicious. That's why. Exactly. That's it. Because it's delicious, and that's it.
Right. Current accepted theory is for ancient man to develop a taste for raw meat. Because hunter-gatherers had to eat raw meat. and raw meat is just protein, and protein has glutamates, and it's nasty. And so if you chew raw meat enough, you'll release the glutamates, so you will start to like that savory taste. But you got to go through a lot of disgust before you get to that point. And so the current accepted theory is that that's why we evolved the umami taste.
I want to thank our ancestors for doing all the dirty work on this one.
Exactly.
I want to thank our ancestors for doing all the dirty work on this one.
Yeah. So, but the thing is that umami is in, so it's not just MSG. So MSG is just pure essence of umami, which is direct sodium glutamate, right?
Monosodium glutamate.
Yeah. Glutamate, right? So otherwise, glutamates are there in so many things. Parmesan cheese is just loaded with glutamates. So tomato pulp, tomato paste is loaded with glutamates. Mushrooms are loaded with glutamates. Shrimp and a lot of seafood. In general, red meat is very, very high on glutamates, and particularly bone broth, right? So if you like have ramen and you have your broth cooked with bones, it's going to be loaded. Seaweed is very, very high on glutamates and so on. And what umami actually does is that it gives you that lingering savory flavor that rather than amplify other tastes, it makes the other tastes linger for longer. So it allows your cuisine to be more minimalist. That's why Japanese cooking, they don't have to have a ton of spices, a ton of salt, a ton of anything else. Everything is less. They just amp up umami, and you can just sit and linger, and it's very subtle, but it just lasts a longer time and is very addictive, right? So Indian food is not high on umami in general, unless you're dealing with the fermented foods of Northeast India or the seafood, at least in the southern coast and so on, or the dried fish that people
We decided to take the spice route. We decided to take, let's traumatize our taste buds into enjoyment. Let's do that. Darshan says, thank you for the answer, by the way. Okay, let's go. What do you think about, Tirth says, what do you think about all the recent theories saying that MSG isn't all that bad? MSG isn't all that bad. That was a myth. And also, I would also like to take this opportunity to recommend another book that I think goes very well with yours, which is Bill Bryson's The Human Body, Guide for Occupants, because it has this spectacular chapter that covers literally just the tongue and everything we go through on the tongue, and it goes into detail about the MSG scare. And now I'll do a tiny bit of showing off, because I also know this whole MSG is bad thing. There has never been any scientific evidence to back this at all. In fact, even when people scoured through medical literature, they found that the only evidence of anybody panicking about was in one Japanese medical journal, one letter to the editor, in which a guy said, I think this work was never peer reviewed. It was never nothing. But for some reason, people just ran with it. And they mounted this smear campaign against Ajinomoto, which is a company basically. And a lot of people don't know that.
Started by the guy who found the umami taste bud.
Exactly, right? And then this weird campaign started, and it got into our heads that MSG is bad. So MSG is not bad for you. And I'm so pleased that I managed to do one answer. One whole answer.
It was originally made from seaweed. Right.
Yes, exactly.
It's synthesized from seaweed. The interesting something about scientific studies, right? You also have to remember that when people use terms like, say, carcinogenic. Okay, so I want to tell people that when you read things in the paper that say, "Oh, this is carcinogenic," you have to remember what carcinogenic actually means. In most situations, the paper where it said that would say that, by the way, if I take MSG and force feed a rat for 30 days, only a diet of MSG 3 times a day, then the chances of it getting brain damage increases by 10%, is what the paper is saying.
But that's at that level, at that concentrated,
so adding
bombarded
1/4
level.
teaspoon, exactly, 1/4 teaspoon is, and by the way, as Michael Pollan says, in small quantities, most things are safe for you. In large quantities, everything is unsafe for you. Okay, so it's only a question of figuring out your balance.
That is a very good point to take away. Rahul Chaudhary, thank you for the super chat, and he has a question. And this is an interesting question. One advice to young people who have recently started cooking and are resource constrained. P.S. Getting your book now. Also, I'll club this with another question that I saw somebody in the chat have, which is kind of tangentially ties into this, which is I think Arnab was asking, not that Arnab. But Arnab, not that Arnab.
He doesn't expect answers, right? He gives the questions. He also answers it himself.
Exactly. So the add-on question to this was, how do you make things like, say, for example, fancy European cuisines, if you're, say, resource constrained or living among areas where you probably wouldn't have access to those
Yeah.
ingredients. So how substitutable are things? I want to dilute that question down to how substitutable are things, because so many recipes you go online and read today will ask for a
Yes.
specific kind of pepper or a specific kind of vinegar and things.
Yeah.
So to take those two
Yeah.
questions, one advice to people who've just started cooking and how
Yeah.
substitutable are ingredients.
Every ingredient is substitutable. Okay. And I think so. See, the way flavor memory works is that if you've eaten something in Italy at some point of time and you remember that taste and you want to recreate that taste, yes, it may be hard to recreate that with the quality of Parmesan cheese you get in India and so on, right? But if you're someone who's just looking to explore, experiment, and get a sense of what those other flavors are, trust me, every ingredient is replaceable. So you just have to understand what role something plays. Every acid is replaceable, right? So by the way, Indian recipes that calls for tamarind or kokum, you can replace with vinegar and people would not know, because our tongues taste all acids the same way. Okay, you can replace it with lime juice. You can replace it with orange juice.
And I don't know if you should be saying such controversial things on a stream. What if big kokum or big tamarind come after you, Ashok? What then? I mean, they've got eyes and ears everywhere.
Exactly, yeah, or big armchair for that matter.
Like,
right?
man, imagine the audacity of living in the southern part of India, just talking out openly against the tamarind lobby. Tamarind lobby. Yeah. How could you?
All acids are interchangeable, and likewise, even within vegetables, you can look at. So if you don't get like a zucchini and things like that, there are other gourds in India that have very similar textures. You'd be surprised.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, you won't be able to tell the difference. There are, in fact, at least in some parts of India, you can even get some varieties of cucumber that are a lot similar to zucchini in that sense, right? Some kinds of yellow pumpkins are very similar to butternut squash and those kinds of things. So always find there are always equivalents, and I think there are some websites and there are some books that kind of give you all these alternatives. You can easily substitute them. In many cases, if you're really creative, like for example, if you live in North India and you don't have access to curry leaf and you want to make a South Indian dish, right, which is where curry leaf is very important, a combination of basil and lime zest, tulsi and lime zest, will give you very similar flavor profile of curry leaf as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because a month and a half ago, we were literally up north in Uttarakhand, and dosa batter was there, everything was there, but just could not find kadhi patta anywhere up there. Like, just could not find kadhi patta anywhere.
Apparently, I was told yesterday, I was in a chat with somebody from Uttarakhand, and they said that kadhi patta grows in the wild like crazy in Uttarakhand and nobody eats it. So apparently, so you just have to walk around the hills, and if you know what to look for, you'll just find it apparently.
That's horrible. So yeah, in short, you can substitute multiple things. This is a thing that I've actually found very useful, guys. Whenever I'm going through a recipe that has complicated things, I always open a separate browser window and just look X substitute, dash substitute. Like you said, 9 times out of 10, and the option that comes up is stupid easy.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if you're looking to save money and if you're a single person and not, one thing that people waste, right? Vegetables go bad very quickly, even in the fridge, right? So as much as possible, buy frozen vegetables. Frozen vegetables are, trust me on this, fresher than fresh vegetables.
Yeah, because they're harvested and immediately frozen, unlike vegetables which are picked to be fresh and lose their sugars as they stay out at room temperature.
And they're harvested unripe, and they're harvested not at peak nutrition. Okay?
Correct.
Because they have to survive the supply chain and to get to a city and so on. So the only thing fresher than a frozen vegetable is you having your own kitchen garden and plucking something straight from the tree.
This is 100% true.
Yeah.
Like one of the biggest kitchen myths is frozen peas are better than fresh peas. Like any time of the day.
Any time of the day. Yes.
That Arnab has another question now. Again, I don't know, right? Because this is not a diet advice channel. So I don't know if I want to entertain questions like, is keto okay, or is keto not okay? Or
so the only answer to that is, please do not take diet advice from someone who's not a nutritionist, someone who's not a dietitian, someone who's not a doctor. So that's number one. Don't take it from WhatsApp, but don't take it from me as well. I am not a dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist. My focus is on flavor. My focus is on productivity and fun and experimentation, not on diet. Right? So that's serious stuff. That's very individual. There's no universal advice. One advice for one person does not. Some people keto works. Some people it does not. So please do talk to your doctor. So that's what I would say.
And this man wrote a book about food, so he knows what he's talking about. Oh, thank you, Nish Whitey. That's very, very kind of you. He said, wow, just watch Rohan recommending the book on Chalchitra Talks. I don't know if you're aware or not. I basically recommend this book everywhere I go. And I recommended the book, and I bought the book, started reading this weekend, and here you are. Thank you both. Hey, our pleasure. Absolutely. Okay, more questions. I'm going to go up because in this chat I have ignored This thing, Pooja wants to know, Krish, will you be writing, not Krish, Ashok, will you be writing a book, easy cooking recipes anytime soon? Is that something that interests you at all, like the idea of writing recipes, or do you
No.
much prefer doing this?
No, so the whole, in fact, one of the premises of, in fact, there's an entire chapter in Masala Lab called "Burn the Recipe." Okay,
Right.
And so no, I don't think I'll be writing a book on recipes because I've always thought that a single recipe is not a good way to think about a dish or a culture. It's a frozen in time single instance of one person's idea of what that dish is.
Right.
But yet people give like tremendous importance to authenticity and all of that sort of stuff.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, you can replace ingredients, you can experiment, you can do all kinds of things, and every house cooks it its own way. So recipes aren't my thing. In fact, I've been posting, algorithms on Instagram. Like, so for example, so there's a dish for a typical gravy algorithm or a typical shakshuka algorithm, if you will. And so you can so you can really just make it in like 20 different ways as opposed to a single one.
And that you do see cooking very
not.
Sort of algorithmically, right? That's an approach that you talk about very, very often.
I feel it's how our grandmothers and mothers also. It's just that they're not computer engineers, but that's how they always thought. They thought about what's there in the kitchen, what's going to waste right now, what are the dietary restrictions of the family, who has diabetes, which kid will not eat what, and then they figured out, with all these constraints, what can I make that's nutritious, that's balanced,
wrote
that's
a bunch of protocols and just sort of went with that.
That's what they did. Yeah.
The Daily Chai Latte wants to know, is this book available outside of India? I think so.
Yes.
Because there's a Kindle edition as well.
Yeah. It's also available in print in all major geographies. Yeah.
There we go. I'm going to look for 1-2 more questions in chat, and then I also have one. The Arif wants to know, and actually, this is an interesting question. What's the difference between taste and flavor?
Yeah. So flavor is made of taste, aroma, and mouthfeel. Okay. So flavor equal to taste plus aroma plus mouthfeel. Okay. Taste is what happens on the tongue, just the 5 things: sweet, salt, bitter, umami, sour, and so on. Aroma is, your nose can detect 10,000 different smells. Okay. It's remarkable. It's the most sophisticated apparatus that we have. And by the way, interestingly enough, most people will tell you, is a dog's sense of smell better than a human being's? So without thinking that it's a dog's, the answer is a little bit more complicated. A dog's sense of smell is fantastic for outside smells, meaning smells that come from the outside. Nothing can beat the human nose when it comes to smelling from the inside. All that you actually taste is when you chew on food, your food breaks down into smaller molecules, which all travel up as you breathe out, and your nose is detecting all of that. That apparatus for detecting stuff as you breathe out there is no other animal on the planet that matches that. So we are the best, what you call retronasal smellers. Orthonasal is smelling from the outside, like a wolf or a bear and so on, right? But we are the best retronasal smeller. So that is, aroma is most of the hard work of this thing.
Take that, dogs. Been walking around with that superior attitude, looking at me all funny at airports. I see you now, dog.
So the third part is mouthfeel, meaning that our mouths can detect multiple sensations and also different textures, right? So chemically speaking, a limp potato chip and a crisp potato chip are exactly the same thing.
Yep.
But clearly in your mouth, they feel entirely different. And so clearly, so we can detect crispness, sharpness, viscosity, thickness, astringency, pungency, temperature, coldness. Like, for example, chilies are hot because they fool your temperature sensors into thinking that it's actually hot, right?
Right.
Mint, on the other hand, fools your temperature sensors into thinking it's cold. So that's why you get that cool menthol feeling and so on, right? So it's just that it's all of this that makes the flavor experience. And by the way, there's more than that. It's also sight, meaning that, like, if you see a candy that's red in color, and if you see a candy that's yellow in color, and because these colors are all artificial, you could put the strawberry flavor in the yellow candy. Your brain will not accept it. You will say there's something wrong with it because you cannot accept a yellow thing as tasting of strawberry, right? So sight also plays a role, and also hearing. Okay, hearing. I'll tell you a very fascinating thing. So when you're in an airplane, the reason airplane food tastes bad, apart from the fact that it's actually shitty food. I was just going to say, you do not have to make scientific excuses for the quality of airplane food. But they have other things not going their way. One is the fact that at that altitude, at that pressure, your tongue doesn't work very well. That's number one. At low moisture, humidity, low pressure, your tongue doesn't work very well. Number two, because of the ambient engine noise, you don't hear very well. If you can't hear your own chewing, your brain will tell you that your food is not good. Okay,
That's
so
wild.
it's really all of that is going against airline food. And incidentally, the reason people say, oh, first class, business class food is fantastic is because in business class, they give you noise cancelling headphones. So you want to enjoy economy class food, wear noise cancelling headphones. You'll find the food to be a lot
That's
better.
the cheapest business class ticket you can get is a pair of noise cancellation headphones.
Noise cancelling headphones. Yes.
That's amazing. What a great thing to learn. The star, we have our first ever question from an actual star from far away. Beetlegoose6945 wants to know, can you guys talk about gluten and the outrage it triggers? Also, how is Satan as an alt protein source? PS, big fan of both you humans. Thank you for the question and for the super chat.
See, gluten is just the protein in wheat is gluten. Okay,
right.
So it's basically it's multiple proteins, gluten and gliadin. In the presence of water, they form this stretchy thing that we call gluten. Okay.
Yes. Which is also, by the way, you have a chapter on that in detail in Masala Lab. Now available at all major retailers and online in Kindle and paperback.
Thank you. I need to learn how to do that.
That's my job. That's my job.
Yeah. So the whole point about gluten is that the reason we have baking bread as a concept around the world is because wheat has gluten, and the family of these grains have gluten, right? Mm-hmm. You can't make a bread out of rice or corn or anything without, because there's something to stretch it and hold the air inside. Otherwise, it will just escape. The yeast won't have anything to, hold back the carbon dioxide that the fermentation process generates, right? And so, but there are a small number of people on the planet who have sensitivity to gluten. It's called celiac disease. Right. And so on. Yes. So they are, and a small number of people also have wheat allergies. Okay, it's not directly related to gluten, but it's related to something else in wheat. But it's still all clubbed with gluten sensitivities and so on. So large sets combine both of these, and these tend to be very vocal. Often tend to be vegan activist types, and so there's this sort of global thing that a gluten-free diet is somehow good and so on. There's nothing to it. Okay, we all eat our chapatis.
Eat that bread. Eat that
exactly
bread.
Right.
Eat
this entire
bread.
stretch from Europe onwards to Middle East to north of India is the wheat zone, including the US, right? Yeah, so we're all fine. Yeah.
Such good bread in this world. Of Dyson Men, thank you for your super chat. Here's a question. What do you think about the Michelin stars and the guide?
First remember that the Michelin guide was introduced by the Michelin tire company as a way of getting people to take their cars and drive and hopefully wear out their tires and buy more Michelin tires. And so they selectively picked restaurants that were very far away. They didn't pick restaurants in Paris. They picked restaurants far away as possible, so people would drive there. So obviously that's the origin. Okay, and over time it's sort of become this mythical thing where 1 star, 2 stars, and 3 stars. I think you should take it. I've eaten it a few, and I think it's a matter of if you go there with the expectation that you're going to be fed like Sukh Sagar or something like that, or one of these other Shiv Sagar type pav bhaji type place where you get tons of food for small amounts of money, you'll be very disappointed. You will get an astonishingly small amount of food, and it'll be like 9 courses, and it is not for you to stuff yourself. It is for you to have a gastronomical experience, and it is for you to be surprised. It is
except for Din Tai Fung, which is a dumpling house, and Din Tai Fung is Michelin starred. So go to Din Tai Fung, pay normal rates, and eat a shitload of dumplings. They're really good.
There's one hawker sort of cart in Singapore as well. That's also Michelin star.
Yes. So there are a few of those. There are a few of those,
right? But yeah, so instead, if you are a foodie, it's worth that as an experience. Don't go there when you're hungry and stuff like that. Okay, that's not. It's a place for you to go appreciate what creativity a fine artist can do. It's sort of like it's like, say, watching a sort of like an art film by some Iranian director or something, and then watching a Salman Khan film and saying, oh man, comparing the both. They're catering to different audiences. Yeah, very different experiences, and you can enjoy both.
And I think that's like, in the sense that a lot of Michelin restaurants are good restaurants, but not all of the best restaurants in the world necessarily will be on the Michelin guide. There are plenty of tremendous restaurants and food experiences that are not and will not be in the guide, and that should not be the only gold standard of what good
you should generally eat. Where the locals eat is a good way to discover new tastes.
Very good advice.
That is why it's just don't go where the tourists go. Okay, those are tourist traps. Go where the locals go. And if you genuinely like food, there may be some things that may be hard for you to you may not be used to those tastes. For example, in Mexico City, there's something called Mexican caviar. Is actually ant larvae.
Right.
And honestly, it's tastier than actual caviar. It is just delicious.
But it's just getting around the psychological block.
Yeah, so you're eating an insect and you're gonna kind of get used to that. But
yeah, I went to a Mexican restaurant once and they gave me like, if they eat it like popcorn, right? They eat those crickets, like crispy crickets.
Crickets, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
crispy crickets, and they gave it to me. And same, I just basically after the first bite, I just didn't look. I just ate it like I'd eat popcorn, and after about 5 bites, I was like, "Hey, this is delicious."
Yeah,
this is.
So it's like a healthier version of popcorn, a higher protein version of popcorn, and it's delicious.
It is delicious. I would 100% agree. Aditi, thank you for your super chat. Aditi says, "Love Krish Ashok's Twitter. Been a fan since 09. 100% with you on that, Aditi. Would love to read books on the history of food and ingredients." So I feel like that's something that would be right up your alley because. Also, you should absolutely 100% follow Ashok on Instagram, where he is present as _Masala Lab.
Because Masala Lab was taken by some.
Of course, it was. Let me guess. A 5-star restaurant. Oh, I thought it would be a 5-star some Indian restaurant.
No, they make spice. They make spice mixes.
But his account in general, on a normal day, you'll open your Instagram account and be like, 85 million years ago. This parasite happened to be in Bangalore, and that is why this food is now so different in Kerala. It's great. It's amazing. You should absolutely do it.
Yes.
Okay, more questions. Arnab, this again is one that I would be happy to answer, but I'm sure Ashok can. Is it true that breakfast cereals were invented to curb sex drive? I will say this. Look up the history of Kellogg's. Your cereal will taste a little different tomorrow morning. It was, and for anybody here who has found cereal bland, it was literally invented because he said it is bland enough to curb any intemperate urges. That is pretty much a direct quote, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I mean, actually, there was, I don't know if you remember, back in the day, there used to be, when I was young, when the only source of watching movies used to be Star Movies.
Yes.
And the only adult movies would come at like 11 p.m.
That Anthony Hopkins movie
Yes.
about Dr.
So
Kellogg?
there is exactly.
The
So that's what
Road
I'm
to
saying.
Wellville is what it's called, if I'm not mistaken.
The Road to Wellville, right. Although when we were teenagers, the only reason we used to sit and watch Road to Wellville because it had some marginal amount of nudity. That's really about it.
Yes.
But yes, it was indeed about the need to. So the Dr. Kellogg's idea was he had some very kooky ideas about not masturbating.
Kooky, you're
not
so
having
generous.
Sex.
Kooky. He was kooky, yaar. How doctor gets after 2 pegs, yaar. He's a kooky fellow.
So, and his brother decided that maybe, forget these crazy things, maybe we can make some money with this. And he was the marketing genius. And so actually, incidentally, it was he who introduced this whole mythical concept of breakfast being the most important meal of the day.
Yes, also complete marketing fabrication.
Nobody ever ate breakfast before, okay? Except people who work in the fields and who do hard labor and eat carbs before they go head out into the fields. Lazy people like us, nowhere in the world ever ate breakfast, okay? So I think it's important to remember. So breakfast cereals, that is indeed their history. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, Dr. Kellogg had weird ideas and included, if I'm not mistaken, doing lots of not so great actual physical experiments on children, like tying their hands and things like that to get them to stop. Yeah. It's wild. I'm just saying, like parathas for breakfast is the way to go, guys. I'm just saying.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
It is that. So I don't know if that answers your question. Deepak Chandra Shekharan wants to know, can ketchup be substituted for recipes that ask for tomato sauce?
Absolutely. Actually, the ketchup is a better alternative than using regular tomato puree or anything. In general, use both, right?
Oh, right.
Because I think, ketchup has a lot of sugar and vinegar. So the general idea is that anything that calls for puree tomatoes or anything that calls for tomatoes, add tomatoes, add ketchup as well. Just add a couple of sachets of whatever is left over from Swiggy, Zomato. And trust me, it'll be delicious because so ketchup has not just tomato paste, which is high on umami. It has vinegar, so sourness. It has garlic powder. It has garlic powder. It has salt. It has sugar.
Ketchup is the sweet spot of umami. Like in the sense, you ever want to explain what umami means to somebody, ketchup is actually the perfect definition. Ketchup, a little dressing of ketchup, that's umami. That perfect flavor of, this is not sweet, it's not spicy, it's not this thing. It's just
and it lingers in your mouth for a long while. Yeah,
it's just that. Lots of people's mind in the chat currently being blown by the fact that we've basically destroyed an entire generation of children right now by saying it's fine, you don't need to eat breakfast, guys. There are going to be so many
complete
fights with
nonsense,
parents tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Well, you know what the man on the internet told me, Ma. Dave Ravi, this is a nice question. Why does slow cooking and resting and marinating help? Does it build flavor and stuff? But what's the science behind it? Let's talk about tenderization and osmosis. Let's do
Oh,
this.
yes. So it entirely. So the thing is that time is a function of what ingredient you are actually cooking, right? And for that, so marination of meat has no effect on the flavor of meat. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to remember. Marination, people think it penetrates inside the meat. It doesn't. And so I'll give you a very simple grisly thought experiment. Please don't try this at home, right? We are made of the same material that the chicken is made of, right? So because we're all animals, and all animals had a common ancestor, our muscles are all the same, and so on. Please try applying garlic, ginger garlic paste, yogurt, and some other spices on your skin, and wait for 24 hours.
When did this turn into a Taj Jiva Spa ad? When did that happen? When did this become an ad for the Taj Jiva Spa?
Right. If you think if all of that stuff is penetrating and now you will taste of ginger, garlic, and yogurt, no, because if that were to happen, we'd all be dead. Okay. Animal and animal tissue all have cellular mechanisms to prevent large molecules from entering. So they have strict controls of what can and cannot enter. Okay. Only osmosis is allowed, and only salt can do that. Okay.
Yes.
So that's why soaking meat in salt water is what helps it build flavor, because salt actually gets in. Okay. And salt helps it retain water. So that's why your chicken won't be like bone dry. Okay.
Yep.
When you cook it, right? So marination. So first thing is that there's no difference between a half an hour marination and a 24-hour marination. So that's number one. Soaking in salt water is what matters. And you only need to, for chicken, you only need to soak for like an hour or so.
But there is a difference. There is a difference in terms of what meat you're working with, right? In the sense that
it does.
Different meat will, like for example, a cut of red meat will take longer for that salt marination to happen versus with a fish where you just put it in a couple of minutes. Like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the leaner the meat, the quicker it is, because it's just muscle tissue. The red meat will have a lot of myoglobin and a lot of these fat cells in between. That's going to slow down salt absorption. Because salt, fat, as we know famously, doesn't like water, right?
Yeah.
So, and salt, all this stuff happens through water. So they have to fight about a bit. So it's a little bit sort of like you're getting into peak traffic in like Mumbai trains and so on. So with red meat, you have to brine for a longer period of time. And again, the size of the cut
don't give me that peak traffic in Mumbai. I've lived in Chennai and I've spent time in things. I feel like you can use Chennai as the example here. It's fine. I've seen what the traffic is like.
Yeah. I was just going for your target. In any case. So anyway, I think so. The larger the cut, the longer you marinate. But the point is that I think this is about marination. So if you think about cooking is a whole different thing. Now, again, if you're cooking a tough cut of red meat, it helps to cook it for a long period of time. But then again, not at a high temperature. So the problem is that meat really protein denatures at 60, 70 Celsius. That's it. Okay. Starches need a higher temperatures to cook. So if you're cooking like rajma, I mean, you can go pretty high and you can keep it simmering for a long period of time, like urad dal and rajma, like you can cook overnight and all that. Okay. And at a reasonably high temperature, but you don't want to cook meat at a high temperature because then you'll get just bone dry stuff. Okay?
Yeah.
So you want to keep the temperature under 65 or so that you get that perfect, you get so the connective tissue turns into gelatin. So it's very juicy and your protein doesn't get too hard, right?
What they call low and slow, right?
Low and slow, right? So that's the thing with meat. With plants, you can go long. But then again, there are certain things that you do not want to cook for long at all. Okay. So greens are an example of things that you should not cook for long at all. Okay. They get very nasty. Even if your palak paneer cooked a little longer gets really, really nasty. Because at the end of the day, you're destroyed. So, another grisly thing I often like to say is that the animal died when it was slaughtered. All cells of the animal died when it was slaughtered.
That's a great name for your second book, by the way. Another grisly thing I always like to say is a great name for a book.
Yes. So every cell in an animal's body dies when the animal dies because it needs blood, it needs oxygen, and so on. Plants are not built that way. Okay. Plants have a lot of independent decision making. So every plant cell is alive. Your fruit and your vegetable is alive till you slaughter it in the kitchen. Okay. Or in many cases, when you put it in the pan. Okay. So all of your enzymatic defenses that the plant wants to prevent you from killing it and eating it all come into play in the kitchen. Okay, so that's why you have to be wary of plant ingredients, because they will turn bitter, they will do all those kinds of things, because that thing says, if you kill me, I'm going to prevent you from eating me. Okay, so greens actually turn brown because there's an enzyme called polyphenol oxidase that turns it brown, it turns it nasty, it turns it bitter, and this is basically plants fighting back.
I learned this the hard way. I learned this the hard way. So one of the first things I cooked in lockdown, one of the easiest recipes I found, was wilted spinach, where it's like chop little garlic, put it on a pan, wilt it a little bit. And I still had this paranoia of I don't know how long is too long. I don't know. And when you're cooking for the first time, this thing will be, I'd rather overcook it a little than undercook it, because I don't want to eat some raw shit. And I learned the hard way. I overcooked, I think I lost like 3 kilos in first 2 weeks of lockdown just by overcooking and not being able to finish my spinach. So if there's one piece of advice given that I can tell you from personal experience, don't overcook your greens.
Yeah. And remember, the other thing to remember is that plants are always tricky, because you can eat 99% of all animals in the raw, provided it's really freshly killed, and you will not die. Okay, because a living animal has a vested interest in keeping bacteria and fungi away, and you're perfectly fine. If you're stuck in the forest and you have no food, 99% of things that move, you can hunt and eat and you will survive. 99% of plants will kill you. Okay.
This is true.
So remember that plants do not want to be eaten, right? Literally, when you cut an onion, the molecule that it synthesizes hits your eye and breaks down into sulfuric acid. Okay, it's dilute sulfuric acid. So an onion goes to the level of doing an acid attack on you to prevent you from eating it.
Yeah.
So so just start respecting plants.
One of my favorite quotes is I think Terry Pratchett, who said, was it? I think, okay, I might be remembering, but he said, all fungi are edible. Some fungi are only edible once.
Exactly.
Which I think is a
so Hitchhiker's Guide as well, right? So so there's this scene in Restaurant at the End of the Universe where a cow-like thing comes and sits on the table and says, I'm your dish of the day. I'm like, how can I eat an animal that wants to be eaten? It says that science has finally figured out in the 23rd century, it has designed an animal that wants to be eaten, and now you want to eat a salad. I know some plants who disagree with that. So
another quote from Hitchhiker's Guide that I think goes very well for your health cooking, which is, I think it was Douglas Adams, right? But if you want to make a perfect apple pie from scratch, first you must create the universe.
Create the universe. Right? Absolutely. Yes.
And there we go. Okay, so Shivanshu has a question. Shivanshu, thank you for the super chat. Very kind of you. He says, just like Wow Momos sells momos, what Indian food has potential to become the core of a new food chain or a food listing? What single food?
Yeah. It's a good question. I'll tell you why. Because this has been something that I've been talking about. A lot of people, from the food businesses have talked to me to brainstorm this and so on. Right? There's a little bit of history to this, and we briefly touched upon it. India has had historically an obsession with fresh food. Okay.
Yes.
And fresh food essentially almost always means perishable food, food that does not have a long shelf life and is ideally eaten hot, not eaten cold. Okay. And very few things in India improve their flavor with time. Some, fish curry, a few things whose flavor improves with time and all of that. Large section of things. And it all goes back to the caste system, where essentially a lot of people, upper caste people, were not allowed to eat stale food or food cooked by someone else. And we had a distinction between kacha food and pakka food. Pakka food is things that are deep fried because they have a longer shelf life. But deep fried food also, the problem with deep fried food is that they go rancid and they kind of go limp after beyond a point of day. It's, you order French fries, you know how terrible it is. Right? So that's what happens. Right? So the problem is that for something to become a restaurant staple, it needs to be more than just delicious and tasty. It has to have a lot of other characteristics. It has to be supply chain optimizable, meaning that different pieces of it can be made by different companies. It can be assembled in real time and have a really good taste. You don't want all the cooking to happen from scratch in the restaurant or the fast food chain. So a lot of Indian dishes are not designed for that, like the way a burger or a pizza is. Right? And so that's why. So I think, sometimes people get obsessed. Why isn't Indian food getting any more popular than, say, a pizza? No, boss. See, the pizza is a template that just makes it easy for that industry. Then all they can innovate with all toppings and they can do all of that sort of, right? Yeah. It's hard to do that with dosa because the dosa has to be eaten absolutely crisp, absolutely
Yeah,
hot
yeah.
in under 2 minutes after it comes to the kitchen. It's not suitable for any other. It's not suitable for delivery. It's not suitable for anything.
No,
So
not dosa
that's
doesn't
what. So
last
you
like
you
10
guys got to
minutes.
invent new. You got to invent newer templates that are long lasting, and it has to be new ingredients. I think that's the only way to think about it. And I'm sure there are some Indian restaurateurs working on those things as we speak.
I'm sure they are. I would not be surprised at all. Dwayne D'Souza has a question. I make curries, but they're never thick enough. Help. Are you using too much water? What's going on?
So thickeners. So it's very simple. Any kind of starch will thicken. Okay. So just any kind of rice flour, corn flour, cornstarch, besan, what have you. Any starch powder will thicken. Okay. So don't add too much of it because they thicken really well. But if you want like insane levels of efficiency in thickening and you don't want to affect the taste, then in my book I recommend xanthan gum. You just need a tiny amount. A quarter teaspoon will thicken like a kilogram of food. Okay.
You see, wow.
It is an insane.
That's like some vibranium level. Thickener. That's like some vibranium level.
And it adds no taste, right? So cornstarch kind of adds that it dilutes the flavor. Besan has its own aroma and taste and all that, whereas xanthan gum is just fantastic. Actually, by the way, xanthan gum is a fantastic hack to make gluten-free chapatis, okay? Because it's notoriously hard to roll jawar and bajra and those flours. And people often add maida or atta as a mix to get it to roll easier. And people feel it's a cop-out. So add just a teaspoon of xanthan gum for a cup of flour, and you will notice that you can roll it, and it's just phenomenally easy. And that way you get to eat near 100% jawar or bajra or one of those millet flours if you like that.
So there we go. That's a pro tip. The next time you're passing the planet Xanthar, just pick up some xanthan gum and you'll be able to use it.
It's named after a bacteria, by the way. It's named after a bacteria that produces this Xanthomonas campestri or something. So it's a bacteria.
That's amazing. Learn something new every single day. Xanthan gum also great. Xanthan gum also great. Well blend in frappuccinos. Says yes, done.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Just a tiny amount, and it won't affect the taste, and it'll keep that texture while you're drinking it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for that.
By the way, the alternative to xanthan gum is guar gum. Okay, guar is the Western way of saying gawar, okay, which is our bean, a cluster bean. Okay?
Yes.
So that has an insane thickener that is almost as powerful, in fact more powerful than xanthan gum. And so guar gum. And by the way, you just look at the ingredients of any of your consumer goods; they will all have either guar gum or xanthan gum to keep your cookies and all that stuff, stable.
Yeah.
Right? So. They're stabilizers, yeah.
This is horrible. What I hate is that I just learn new ingredients and new things, and then I have this horrible capitalistic instinct to just want to go buy them, and then it's just going to sit at the back of my shelf for really long. I know, so stop it.
Yeah, so you put it in the freezer. Yeah,
put it in the freezer. Amok Sharma saying Rohan fitting marble into everything. Damn right, I find a way. There's another question, which is Dev Ravi again wants to know. What kitchen equipment would you say is something that everybody should have aside from a mixer, etc.? Again, I would like to point out that this is answered in detail in the book Masala Lab. Whose author, by pure coincidence, happens to be sitting on this call right now.
Yes.
Okay, tell us. Okay, you know what? Let me show this. Three things that everybody should have in their kitchen. That's it.
Yeah. So other than a blender, which as you assume is standard, and if I'm assuming appliances, not like vessels and so on. I would actually go with a spice grinder and if you actually ask me, I would actually skip the mixie and have an immersion blender, which I think is very nice because you can make like soups. You can blend things.
Are these those big stand bowl things?
No. Immersion blender is a handheld thing, and you attach that thing, and you just
got it.
Mix anything you want directly. You make soups. It's a pretty really useful.
Oh, the hand one, got it.
Yeah. And by the way, so it's got these attachments, so you can even like you use it on dough and all that if you're like too tired to
those kneading hooks.
Yeah, kneading hooks. It's got a way to blend like a soup, like boil a bunch of vegetables in a pressure cooker and just immersion blend. You have a soup, right?
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so immersion blender, rice spice grinder, and
you had, I guess, your regular blenders one. So I'm just wondering what other small gadget. Oh, sorry, electronic pressure cooker. It's absolute must-have. So this is the category of item that is popularly known as Instant Pot as of that brand.
Right.
But there are now various brands that make exactly the same thing. Okay. So the Instant Pot category of electronic pressure cooker is a fantastic Swiss Army knife. You can do everything from pressure cooking, slow cooking, overnight cooking, making yogurt, air frying. a whole bunch of things in a single device. So
That sounds amazing.
fantastic.
So you're saying this is what was the exact word you looked at? Just
electronic pressure cooker. Yeah.
Electronic. I'm sending you the bill for this.
Yeah. So basically,
I was happy with my Hawkins. Yeah. I was happy.
So
my Hawkins
and
I were happy.
It's sort of like, yeah. So this is the instant pot category of product.
So the Daily Chai Latte has one more question. Are freshly cut chunky fruits better than juices?
Always. Juices are the worst things. Okay. Juices. So here's the thing. So
the last time somebody said that a world war started, but fine.
So essentially, what do we? Fruits are fundamentally just sugar, and that too, they are the worst kind of sugar. That's fructose. Okay, but when we eat the whole fruit, we get tons of other things. We get the fiber, we get all the essential oils, vitamins, and all of that stuff, right? But when you squeeze the fruit, you leave all the fiber out, and you're just getting the sugar and the water. That's all you're getting. You might as well just pour sugar in water and drink it. It makes really no difference.
You don't need to tell me twice.
So therefore, juices avoid. Okay, unless you're like really thirsty and you've run a marathon or something, by all means, do that. But if you're thinking you're going to drink juice and it's healthy and so on, no, just eat the fruit instead.
Okay, got it. Moving on very quickly, Pratik Kanti, thank you for your super chat. What is your take on organic food hype?
No, it's not hype. The hype part, for any label, there's always marketing. There's all that capitalistic stuff that comes in. Okay, but the science of it is actually really cool. Okay, and this is quite interesting.
This is actually one of my favorite things from your book. Yes. This is one of my favorite things from the book. The little bit about please. In fact, when you mentioned shrimp in a previous question only, I wanted to stop you right there and ask you to explain because I love this. Please take it away.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing. So if you go, the reason organic produce tends to be slightly tastier and more nutritious than non-organic produce, to understand that, you have to go back to why plants do what they do, which is that plants obviously want to live their life, they want to reproduce, and they do not want to be eaten by pests, by insects, by moths, by caterpillars, by bacteria and fungi and so on. So to defend against these, they produce a lot of defensive chemicals. Now, the amazing thing is that it's those defensive chemicals that we consider flavor. Okay, so all spices, all fruits, all vegetables, the flavor in them essentially comes from the plant attempting to defend itself. Okay, so in general, if a plant doesn't have to defend itself, and that you've put a ton of pesticide and you're growing it in a monoculture where the only thing is that plant and the plant suffers, no, it's literally like a slave in sterile conditions. It has absolutely no flavor, right? It's the same equivalent of caging chickens and then feeding them corn all day and then that meat tastes bad. It's the same thing, okay? Except that we don't seem to consider one cruelty in the other, but that's a separate issue. But here's the thing. So the whole idea of organic being that you let the plant be attacked by a few pests, okay? Like it is in nature. And the plant therefore defends it. And because the nature of pests is that it's a percentages game, you will lose some of the crop, okay? That's why organic food is more expensive, because the yields are lower, right? The sizes are smaller and so on, right? But they will be tastier because the plant is being attacked. Now, even if you don't want to buy into the organic versus non-organic hype, when you go to a market and you pick vegetables, please don't pick the largest, freshest, beautiful looking vegetables, because they came from plants that were not attacked by pests. Pick the scarred, misshapen, scarred looking, tough looking sort of thing, the tomato with, some flat, this thing, one small little hole. Trust me, they will have tons more flavor, because by the way, that plant where that thing came from likely suffered a pest attack and managed to fend off and managed to produce this fruit. It's not as good as the other one, but it's going to be really, really tasty, right? So first bit of advice, pick the ugly vegetables in the market. You'll often have tastier these things in general. It's the same logic. Now, the point he was making about shrimp is quite fascinating. So how do plants detect that they are under attack? Is that they sense a molecule called chitin, which is there in all insects. Okay, so that's how they detect. So plants are able to distinguish between different insects based on the contents of their saliva, and also generally the fact that they are under attack by sensing chitin, which is there in all insect kingdom, right? So it so happens that shrimp and crustaceans come from the same family, so they also have chitin in their shells and so on. So organic farmers will often take the shells of shrimp and crabs and snails and so on, powder that and add it to the soil, and fool the plants into thinking they're under attack because that has chitin, right? But they're not under attack. So therefore, a lot of organic vegetables, you can grow organic vegetables super tastily by, if you buy shrimps whole, deshell them, and then dry up the shells and then powder them, and then you can actually get fantastically tasty vegetables.
That's
because you're fooling the plant into thinking it's under insect.
Legitimately one of my favorite facts from your book. Genuinely. I'm going to take one more question from the audience, which is from Prashant Mankani, who wants to know, what are the best meal prep tips for a bachelor living alone in terms of either appliances or ingredients? So yeah, if you're a bachelor living alone, what's an easy thing to cook? Or what are, well, okay, in fact, let's just use not just easy to cook. What's relatively easy in terms of prep time, and what is not going to perish? Because again, I live alone, and one of my biggest problems is I'll go out and I'll buy things like greens and lettuce and that. And like you said, you get them in a certain quantity. But if you live alone, you come back to your fridge 3 days later and it doesn't matter what.
It's all gone,
It's gone, right? So ease of preparation, and also something that will last or that will stay or that will get better with time. If I lived alone and I had a resource crunch, what should I do?
Yeah. So tip number one is buy frozen vegetables as much as possible. They're going to last as long as you possibly want. And then that way, even if you use some of it and leave the rest in the freezer, it will still be fine. Okay. So unlike in the regular fridge where once you start cut, you can't store half of a capsicum or a carrot and it'll go bad, right? And so there is that. Okay. As much as possible. The second thing is when you do things like pressure cook dal or pressure soak and pressure cook chana and all that, do double batch, meaning that make a lot of it. Okay. And then store that in the fridge. Okay. So that way you don't want to be sitting and soaking and cooking chana or rajma and dal. So you just want to be adding it directly to some tomato onion gravy and then you're done.
And portion it out into small containers, so you're only picking them out like one at a time.
Right. The other things you want to do from a waste standpoint is on the weekends, what you want to do is that during the week, whenever you're cutting vegetables, remember again that a plant wants to defend what is inside, which is the embryo. Okay. So it puts all of the defensive molecules very much on the periphery. Okay. Unfortunately, it's that part we discard. Okay. The part just under the peel, because we remove the peel, we discard all of that. Okay. So remember, because it may be fibrous, but it's got tons of flavor. So all the outer husky parts of the garlic, onion, any vegetable, don't throw them away. Save them in the freezer. On the weekend, dump all of them into a bowl of water and let them boil for 90 minutes. And then filter out all the stuff, and you will be left with the most astonishingly flavorful vegetable stock. Okay. And instead of using water, just use that. It is just insane. Okay. And you imagine how much of garlic and onion on those pieces. And sometimes that the top part of the onion is just stuck to the one. You don't have patience. You'll just remove that entire top layer and throw it away. Right. And I'm sure all of us do that. And you throw away the root bit. All of those have tons of flavor. Okay. Coriander roots have 100x the flavor of the coriander stem, and the coriander stem has 100x the flavor of this leaves, and we use only the leaf.
Yeah.
So please use the stems, put all of that, okay? So you can create vegetable stock and keep. The other thing is that put some oil, add ginger, onion, garlic, cashew nuts, and so on, and let it cook for about an hour, and then puree that whole thing. And freeze it in small cups. And these are called base gravies. So instead of sitting and, prepping that basic ginger, onion, garlic masala, just take it out of the fridge, put it into the pan with a little bit of oil, let it heat up, add your ingredients, and you're good to go. Take some of the dal or chana that you kept in the fridge, add it to that, and literally 5 minutes you'll be done with dinner, right? So this is another way.
When was the last time you were a bachelor? Because I'm just imagining your enthusiasm crashing like a wave against this wall of a bachelor who on the weekend is going to be like, no, I think I'm going to drink Old Monk and then make Maggie. Thank you. I'm not going to boil garlic husks. Thanks.
When I was most of my bachelor time I was in the US, and so fortunately, I think the costs and the need to cut costs and maintain all of this meant that we had to sit and figure these things out. But Old Monk's not a bad idea at all.
Okay, there we go. I now have one last question for you. It's not from the audience. This is a more personal question because I saw it in one of your other conversations. You said Tarla Dalal changed food writing.
Yep.
And you believe that. And I am very curious to know what your reasoning is for that. As somebody who grew up, like, it's like, how some people grow up, and it's really scenes in movies, right? Where some people grow up in households where it's almost like they're living under like this huge statue of a god or whatever. In some ways, in my household, Tarla Dalal was that, because I grew up in a household that dominantly cooked Gujarati food. And
Yeah.
I remember like an entire shelf just being like this Talla Dalal temple. So I'm very
Yeah.
curious to know
Yeah.
why you think Talla Dalal changed the food biz.
Absolutely. See, the historical context is that Indian food, and it still continues to be largely professional food, all men, okay? Home cooking, all women,
Mhm.
right? And Indian society is also, till one generation ago, no education for women, okay? So literally, the Talal Dalal generation was probably the first generation of women who even got access to, education, jobs and things like that. So you have to look at it in that context. The third thing is that Indian history, for all of its richness, it's insane how little documentation there is about food. Okay. The little there is either in the context of Ayurvedic medicines and so on, which is not necessarily for tasty food. And there are a few surviving records from the Mughal times where they, at least the chefs, documented what they cooked, and so on. So they had at least some sort of system in place and so on. But largely there is just we know what Sumerians ate 5,000 years ago because they have like recipes in cuneiform. But no, oral tradition, and only one community is allowed to have access to education. So there's literally no writing whatsoever, right? And so in general, we've lost a lot of tacit knowledge. Was always in the heads of people, in the heads of grandmothers, in the heads of women who learned it from there, and that's been continuous tradition. It has never been captured. So Talal Dalal's generation is the first generation to have the opportunity to write it down. The third barrier that they had to overcome was this Indian mindset that only some celebrity can write. Okay, somebody with already some privilege, and a random housewife who's a fantastic cook would never think of becoming an author. So I think that first generation of Tarla Dalal giving a platform for housewives around India to send in their recipes. That's the brilliant thing. It's not Tarla Dalal's recipes. She was a food social media pioneer before social media existed.
True.
Because thousands of women around India would send her, would email her, would snail mail her recipes, and she would post them. Her website still has all of those recipes are all aggregated from women around India. And this was before Orkut, before Facebook. So in that sense, I think she's a spectacular pioneer. The fact that today there's just an explosion of YouTube content and all of this content is because we now have a generation of mothers and generation of women who know that, oh, by the way, I can go get food stuff on the internet. I mean, it seems obvious to us. It wasn't obvious a generation ago.
Yeah.
Right? And Tarlal Dalal made that happen. I think that's what makes her special.
I could keep going for another 30 questions, but I'm going to let you go. And I feel like I would love to do this again, because I'm going to be real with you. There are still questions in the chat. I had, as a good interviewer, prepared a list of 20 backup questions in case, but I don't even know where time went. I don't even know where 30 questions happened. I would love to do this again.
We should do this again. Good fun.
We should definitely. Talla Dalal OP, says somebody in chat. I 100% agree. Talla Dalal OP is absolutely correct. Also, please, Krish Ashok OP in chat, because this has been a wildly illuminating session. Genuinely. Like, let me read out some of the. Oh, it's gone up. People are saying so many myths busted. Right there. Praful is saying, I wasn't expecting to listen to this live for so long, but damn, is Ashok a captivating speaker, which is 100% true. And some of the topics are eye-opening, 24-hour marination, breakfast, and now tough-looking vegetables. What a great stream, says Siddhant Iyer. Ashok, thank you so much for your time. Once again, for everybody who's been on the stream with us, Masala Lab is out and about all over the internet. You can get it online at Amazon or any other bookstore. There's a Kindle edition, there's a paperback edition. I personally love having the paperback because the book's got a lot of cool little diagrams and charts and things like that. It's the sort of thing that it's just nice to sit in your kitchen. Ashok, I hope we can do this again sometime, because this has
absolutely
genuinely been a pleasure.
And lovely questions from your audience, right?
There we go, chat. That was all you.
Normally, many of these food chats, I half the time I have to say, guys, please don't ask me nutrition questions. Your audience genuinely asked cooking and flavor related questions. Good on them. I think they enjoy life.
I have a great audience. I love my audience very much. I think
they enjoy life, right? It's not like they're not like focused on eating kale and getting,
Oh, no. Keto. Not at all. Not at all. The questions here,
fat-free, gluten-free. Yeah.
There's questions that didn't even entertain, that I won't even bother getting you to answer. Like the questions just, should I use ghee? Yes, you should use ghee. Ghee is the best.
Yes, you should.
Ghee is the best.
It is animal fat.
It's
animal fat.
It's
delicious.
Yes, it is delicious.
Yes. And most of our history, we were using animal fat. Okay, the skin under the animals is what you're using. This is fat from a cow, and so I think sometimes people forget that milk and paneer and all of this is animal fat.
Yeah, exactly.
They just think it came from a plant.
No, that's fine.
It's delicious.
Yezdan says the real superhero Krish. So on the next stream, I expect to see you dressed in black with like an eye mask and all of that. Is the hope. And yeah, that's it. On that note, thank you so much to the audience. Thank you, Tara, for your super chat again. Thank you, everybody, for your super chats. Thank you so much for this stream.
So by the way, my T-shirt is actually saying it's a Tamil expression that means for me only rice is important. It's a famous meme dialogue from a Tamil film. Means namakku sorudha mukkiyam means rice is the only important thing. All the rest doesn't matter, right? So that's what my T-shirt says. For those of you who are wondering,
that's amazing. And rice is important. And as somebody who lived in Chennai for a year, I will say that yes, rice is. Don't mess with the rice in Chennai. Did you know that you cannot make jokes about rice in Chennai? Did you guys know that?
One last fun fact about rice in the context of India and the context of Asia. Rice eating cultures are more women-friendly cultures. Because wheat cultures involve people making chapatis one after one whole day.
Yep.
Rice eating cultures, you boil rice for a family in 10 minutes, you're done. You have other things to do. You can go get yourself educated. And so historically, rice eating cultures have always had women getting educated first, having access to go to work, and so on. So on that note, yeah. So rice is indeed.
That just sounds like Chennai propaganda to me. That just sounds like some Tamil Nadu propaganda to me. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining. I will now, on this note, end this stream and